Hey, Shvua Tov, good morning. This week is the Parsha of Vayeira, and we will study the first pasuk of this Parsha. So at the end of last week's Parsha, Lech Lecha, we learned about Avram Avinu, who, upon the command of Hashem, he performs the bris milah, the circumcision, upon himself and his entire household. And that is the context of the beginning of this week's Parsha. It opens up, Vayeira elav Hashem. Hashem appears to him, to Avram, Beilone Mamre, in the plains of Mamre. And he, Yoshev Pesach HaOel Kechom Hayom, Avram is sitting at the entrance of his tent. And it is during the very hot heat of the day. So today we're going to analyze the commentary of Rashi, the very first comment of Rashi on this pasuk, on pasuk Aleph. Vayeira elav. So Hashem, on the words Vayeira Hashem, that Vayeira elav, that Hashem reveals himself to Avram. So apparently Rashi is here to explain why Hashem is revealing himself to him. Why is this appearance taking place? So Rashi explains, Lavaker es hachula. The point of this appearance was to visit the sick. Avram was sick. He performed a bris milah, and therefore Hashem came to visit him. Amar Rab Chama bar Chanina, Rabbi Chama, the son of Chanina, says, Yom Shlishi limilaser haya. It was on the third day from when Avram performed his circumcision. And Hashem came to inquire about his welfare. So according to Rashi, where he brings this opinion of Rabbi Chama bar Chanina, this is the third day after Avram performed his bris. So the question arises, number one, how do we know that this is the third day? Maybe it's the day of the bris, maybe it's the second day, maybe it's the fourth day. How do we know it was on the third day? Question number one. And question number two is, why? If indeed it was on the third day, why did Hashem wait all of these days? Why didn't he go visit him on the first day? Why didn't he visit him on the second day? Now, you could say that on the first day, we learned, and Rashi actually told us at the end of Parsha of Lech Lecha, he tells us in Perek Yud Zayin, it's Pasuk Chav Dalid, it says that Avram was 99 years old, Bihimolo B'sar Arlaso. And Rashi says what happened when Avram took the knife to perform the bris. He was scared, he was nervous, he was old. Hashem actually held Avram's hand and performed the bris with him. It says that Hashem, he, so to speak, performed the bris with him. So based on the Rashi's comment that Avram and Hashem helped Avram perform the bris, it would appear Hashem was there. So perhaps there was a bigger cholim that took place on the first day. But the second day, we don't know about any visitation to Avram. So the question remains, why did Hashem come on the third day to visit Avraham? Why did he not pay a visit on the second day? Now, there is the comment of the Ra'am, Rabbi Leo Mizrahi, one of the commentators on Rashi, who says that Hashem didn't visit him on, indeed Hashem actually did not visit him on the first day because he was busy. As we mentioned before, Avram didn't just perform the bris on himself, he performed it on Yishmael, his son, and the rest of the household. So he was busy with the bris, performing the bris for everyone. Therefore, Hashem didn't visit him on the first day. He says on the second day, there was no call either because according to this opinion, on the second day, there was no sakana, there was no danger. and therefore there was no visitation. Which, of course, that opinion is not according to everyone. So, in fact, it's subject to debate in the Talmud as to whether the second day is a sakana or not. But even if we were to assume that there is no sakana, Bikur Cholim, the mitzvah of Bikur Cholim is not only somebody who's in mortal danger. Any person who's feeling ill warrants a call, a visitation, a Bikur Cholim. So why did Hashem not visit him on the second day? And then there is the Orach Chaim, another commentator, who says that it's ruled in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, that when a person is ill, the only relatives and close friends should visit them right away. Other people who are not related or not close to the person should wait until the third day. The reason being because when people are going to come and visit, it will declare and publicize that the person is ill, which is not good for their mazel. So therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says people should wait to the third day unless you're close family. Now, you could say that Hashem is close to us, right? We know there's a pasuk in Vaschanan, Mi go gadol asher lo elakim krovim elav, banim atam Hashem elokechem. We are children. We are very close to Hashem. Hashem is close to us. He would definitely be considered immediate family. Nevertheless, Hashem shouldn't have visited on the first 2 days because when Hashem comes, it's not a private affair. It's a very public affair. And therefore, according to the Orach Chaim, Hashem did not visit Avram the first 2 days. He only visited him on the third day per the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch. Which that explanation also is not so simple because number one, Hashem doesn't have to come in a private manner, in a public manner. He could come privately, visit Avram. Hashem is well within his ability to do that. And further, if the whole concern is about publicity, everybody knew that Avram was performing the bris 3 days earlier. So everybody knew he was doing the bris. They knew he was old and they knew he would be ill. So it wasn't something that we're trying to conceal about his illness. And finally, as we mentioned before, when Hashem came to visit Avram, he was sitting out by the door, by the entrance of his tent. Kechom hayom, it was at the heat of the day. So there was nobody around. So when Hashem came to visit, indeed it was a private affair. So, anyways, these are two explanations that try to explain why Hashem. They try to reconcile why Hashem visited the Yom Shlishi L'Milaso on the third day from when Avram performed his bris. But at the end of the day, the question remains: why did Hashem wait till the third day? Now, there's another question we could ask. And that is concerning the illness that Avram experienced, the pain that he was going through. As we know, the mitzvah of Milah, the circumcision, was a singular and unique mitzvah, which Avram performed with his physical body. And through this mitzvah, he entered into a covenant with Hashem, not with him, just himself, but for all future generations, for eternity. This was the holy bris, the holy covenant, which entered us into a relationship, a very exclusive, unique covenant with Hashem. And this really took Avram to a whole new level. He was no longer Avram, he was Avraham, and he got all the blessings. This was a very, very special moment to which Avram was striving towards his entire life. As we mentioned last week, Avram served Hashem diligently with devotion till 75. But then when Hashem commanded him, Lech Lecha, he catapulted to a new level. But now at the age of 99, Avram, it was a whole new level where Hashem is revealing himself to him. It was this bris took and transformed Avram to a whole new level. So the question is, why did Avram actually even feel any pain at all? Now, we know, of course, there was physical pain. He was a very elderly person. But on the other hand, there was also a tremendous joy that Avram must have experienced, must have felt during this time when he was doing this mitzvah. So you're going to say, but bottom line, he felt pain. Now, let's introduce an interesting halacha. We know that on Shabbos, it is forbidden to fast. Shabbos is a very holy, special day when we're supposed to enjoy and we're supposed to honor the Shabbos. And part of that, halacha tells us we're not allowed to experience pain or sadness. We don't exhibit any signs of mourning or suffering, or pain. Therefore, a person is supposed to honor the Shabbos by food and drink, and thus should not fast. And therefore, even if it's for the most noble of reasons, a person is going through teshuvah and a person is trying to perfect themselves, or for other very, very good and noble reasons, it is forbidden to fast. Halachically, there is only one exception. And what is that? It's something called a tainis chalam, a fast for experiencing a bad dream. When a person has a very, very disturbing, ominous dream, so what happens is a person is very, very anxious and worried and distressed. So there's a notion that a person wants to nullify the effects of that bad dream. So they go through what's called a tainis chalam. When they fast, they through that process, they hope to nullify any harmful or negative effects of the dream. So halacha says this is something that is permitted. You're allowed to fast. Why is that? Because the whole reason you're not supposed to fast on Shabbos is because that would be an affront to the holiness of Shabbos. On Shabbos, we're supposed to be in a happy mood, an uplifted mood, and therefore we're supposed to take care of our physical body. So if a person went through this, experienced this bad dream, so the entire Shabbos, they're going to eat, they're not going to be in a proper frame of mind, and they're going to be despondent, and they're going to feel anxious and worried about the meaning of this dream. And therefore, for them, the only way they will be able to be relaxed and they'll be able to enjoy their Shabbos is if they're doing something about it through fasting. So ultimately, it is through their fast that will be their time, that will be their pleasure and delight. So the takeaway of this halacha is that sometimes a spiritual sensation will override and overpower a physical need. In other words, on Shabbos, if you fast, your body is suffering. Your body is not eating, it's not drinking. So your body is in a state of distress and pain. So on Shabbos, you're not allowed to be in that state. So why are you allowed to fast for the tainis chalam? It's only because your spiritual, your spiritual feelings and your spiritual well-being is being taken care of, that overrides your physical well-being to the extent that you're not going to feel hungry. You're not going to feel thirsty because your peace of mind is right now the most important thing, and that is all you focus on. And the Shulchan Aruch was written not just for very righteous and pious people. It was written for the average person. So in other words, it's not something that we're talking about a very, very high spiritual level. So if this is the case, what's the takeaway? That ultimately, a person's psychological and emotional and spiritual disposition will oftentimes take care of something that will override and overpower a person's physical. Sometimes we see this even in not even just in the realm of halacha. Sometimes a person goes through a certain procedure or a certain or some other kind of medical event, and they know it's very, very important. It's a life-saving thing, but there is some pain. But sometimes the joy and the feeling that this can be life-saving and important will override any immediate physical feeling or concern. So back to Avram. If the tainis chalam is something that halacha accepts as normative for an average person, how much more so Avram, who was one of the three forefathers, one of the avos, who served his entire life with devotion and mesiras nefesh, self-sacrifice. Are we to understand that when he experienced the bris milah, true, maybe there was some physical pain associated with it, but he should have been so consumed and so overwhelmed with the spiritual significance and he should have been full with elation and be exhilarated by the fact that he has now entered into this special, exclusive relationship with Hashem, to which he strove his entire life, are we going to say now that he's in a state of pain? So how are we to understand this basic premise of Avram experiencing pain? And the truth is, in the Midrash, there's a discussion about this. According to one rabbi, Rabbi Brichia, he says that indeed, when Avram performed the bris, he says that he felt and experienced pain in order to enhance and amplify his schar, his reward. But there's another opinion, Rabbi Levi, who says, no, Avram didn't even circumcise himself. He just looked and he saw that he was circumcised and he didn't feel any pain. And the Midrash says that at that point, Rab Kana tells Reb Levi, you're a liar and a cheater, which is a very, very extreme, sharp, and unusual retort from one rabbi to another, calling this rabbi a liar and a cheater. The fact that he says that Avram didn't experience any pain, this also we need to understand, we need to clarify what was so unusual, whether Avram experienced the pain or not. Why was that so fundamental to this experience? So the Rebbe explains that he introduces this concept, which is very pervasive throughout his talks, and he talks about this idea of the novelty, the innovation of the giving of the Torah. As we know, that our ancestors, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and indeed the Shvatim and all of the Jewish nation, until the giving of the Torah, all studied Torah, performed mitzvot, much like we perform mitzvahs today. But of course, it was different because the Torah was not given. So there were many, many things that didn't come to fruition or did not materialize at that point. There were sections of the tefillin that were not written until many, many years later when they were in the desert. So how would Avram put on tefillin as we know it today with the parchments and the sections that we that we have today, and as well many other mitzvahs. So we know that indeed our ancestors did fulfill mitzvahs. However, it was done more in a spiritual manner, and thus it wasn't just that we observe mitzvahs now, they observe mitzvahs then, but it was a different type of experience. It was more of a spiritual exercise, one that did not necessarily penetrate the physical realm. It was done more as a spiritual exercise. After the giving of the Torah, there was an introduction of breaking barriers. There was no longer a divide of spiritual, material, physical. Indeed, the ability was given that the spiritual and material should be able to be married and fused together. But at the end of the day, we know there's a principle, ma'aseh avot siman labanim. The actions and the deeds of the avos, of our ancestors, are a sign and indeed a precedent, and giving us the ability to draw strength and inspiration from their actions and their deeds. So if this is the case, there must be something in the actions of Avram and the ancestors which would drive and motivate us till today. So there was one mitzvah where we see the fusion of spiritual and physical. In other words, for example, if we learn, the Zohar tells about Yaakov when he wanted to put on tefillin, it was done in a spiritual manner. We read about these sticks that he placed near the troughs to enable the animals that Yaakov had when he was a shepherd for Lavan, and there were different spots and different blotches, which was affected by the sticks that Yaakov placed by the troughs. And in Zohar, it talks about how those sticks were really the spiritual exercise of tefillin. But those sticks did not become holy, much like similar to the way tefillin today, the parchment is holy, right? We have to treat them with a very special, with respect and dignity. Those sticks, after that exercise, they were able to be thrown out because there was no inherent spirituality to these physical objects. There was one instance where a physical object became spiritual in the deeds of our ancestors. And what was that? That was the mitzvah of Milah, where the Torah says that Hashem says, I'm making a covenant. The bris will be in your flesh, to the extent that the physical human body would now become imbued and embedded with sanctity, with holiness. In fact, we know that later in next week's parsha, when Avram sends Eliezer to find a shidduch for his son Yitzchak, he wants to swear an oath that he will abide by the instructions and the parameters for the shidduch. He didn't want Eliezer just going out and find anyone. He wanted someone very, very specific. So he administers an oath. And much like today, an oath is administered over even in the secular realm, over a Bible, over which is taken, of course, from our traditions. What could Avram use? In those days, there was no Sefer Torah. There was no physical item that was holy upon which to administer the oath. All he had was one mitzvah, the mitzvah of Milah, and that was the mitzvah upon which the oath was administered. So we see how the physical became transformed and morphed into a spiritual entity. This is the drive, the koach, upon which today we are able to go and do mitzvahs and transform this world to a spiritual realm, is all derives back to this mitzvah. So the bottom line of this is that the point of the mitzvah of Milah, and indeed all mitzvahs, are to have a transformational effect upon the physical. So it follows from this, if we want the physical to become spiritual, we need to work within the parameters of the physical. That is to say, the performance of the mitzvah has to have natural properties. We can't perform a mitzvah in a miraculous way. If we perform a mitzvah in a miraculous way, what we're doing essentially is we are not performing the mitzvah with the laws of physics and nature. Indeed, we are shattering, we are annihilating nature. We are subduing nature and performing something which is a mitzvah through a force that is above nature. Now, this is clearly only in a case where we're able to fulfill the mitzvah through natural means. There are times that we need to resort to a miracle. Maybe it was in the story of Hanukkah, when there was no natural way to light the menorah, there was not enough oil. So there was a miracle was performed. But generally speaking, when we are able to perform a mitzvah through natural means, we should use natural means, not something that is supernatural, because if we're doing supernatural, the spirituality has not penetrated the physical properties. It was performed in a different realm, in a supernatural realm. So the takeaway from this is the physical needs to be transformed, and we need to work with this physical world through its natural laws, means, and parameters to perform the mitzvah. But then, not only are we talking about the actual mitzvah itself, it is even the preparation, the lead up to the mitzvah, because everything associated with the mitzvah should be performed naturally. Therefore, even when one engages in the preparation for the mitzvah, that too should be performed through natural means. We've mentioned this story in the past about the Alter Rebbe, who was arrested for treason, for trying to subvert the Russian authorities. He was sending money to his Jewish brethren in Eretz Yisrael, which was then ruled by the Turks, who were at war with the Russians. So he was accused of treason, and he was sent to prison, and he was there for several weeks. And he was in this highly secured prison, but many times they would interrogate him. So when they would interrogate him, he would be taken to another location, which was on the other side of a river. So they would have to ferry the Alter Rebbe over from his prison cell to the interrogation. He would have to go on a boat, and they would take him to the other side. On one such occasion, it was nighttime, and the Alter Rebbe wanted to recite the Kiddush Levana. It was something we just, Baruch Hashem, even though it was raining yesterday, we were able to recite the Kiddush Levana last night. The Alter Rebbe wanted to perform this mitzvah. So he requests of the captain of the boat to stop the ship, to stop the boat, so he should be able to recite the Kiddush Levana. And Alter Rebbe is a prisoner, and in a very, very secure prison, and the captain is not going to start taking orders from a prisoner. And of course, he declines, he refuses, in fact. And the Alter Rebbe asks him again. And he says, I'm sorry, I can't do it. So therefore, all of a sudden, the Alter Rebbe, through his spiritual, supernatural means, the boat suddenly stops. And then the Alter Rebbe recited the Kapitel Kuf Mem Ches 148, which is the introduction to the Kiddush Levana, but he did not recite the bracha. Alter Rebbe then requests again of the captain, please, will you stop the boat? Rather, then the captain asks the Alter Rebbe, let's continue going. The Alter Rebbe says, I'll only release the boat if you will stop the boat. And the captain then says, will you bless me? The Alter Rebbe says, yes, I will. And he says, I want to have it in writing. The Alter Rebbe wrote it down. And then the captain agreed, and he stops the boat, and the Alter Rebbe recites the blessing of Kiddush Levana. And the story goes on that how this captain, he kept this manuscript of the Alter Rebbe, and he framed it, and it was stayed in the family for generations. In any case, to the core of the story, the previous Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rebbe Rayatz, once asked, I don't understand. The Alter Rebbe stopped the boat. He was able to recite the Kiddush Levana. And yet, what does he do? He asks the captain, could you stop the boat? And then I'll be able to recite the blessing. You were able to stop the boat anyway, so the boat is stopped. Say the Kiddush Levana, finished. And he explained that the Alter Rebbe was trying to convey a very powerful principle. And that is, when it comes to a mitzvah, and even the preparation, the lead up for a mitzvah, the entire context has to be one where the mitzvah is performed through natural means. Of course, the Alter Rebbe would stop the boat and he was able to perform, but then the whole context of the Kiddush Levana would be a supernatural experience. It wouldn't be something that was natural. The Alter Rebbe wanted to teach us that the mitzvah should be performed to the extent that is possible through natural means. What's the idea behind this? Not only the mitzvah itself, not only the preparation, so it follows also that the end result, the consequence and the aftermath of the mitzvah too should be through natural means. What's this idea? The idea means that sometimes mitzvahs could be quite difficult to do, to perform. And we may at times look for ways to circumvent, cut corners, to make things easier. Indeed, the very notion of effort oftentimes is something that people resent. They don't like doing a mitzvah that is associated with difficulty and hardship. But the Zohar tells us a fascinating thing, that ultimately, holiness and spirituality is associated with work and effort. There's a verse that in the Torah, when the Jewish people are in the desert and they are reminiscing of the good times when they were in Mitzrayim, Asher nochal b'Mitzrayim chinam. We remember the good old days when there was food and we would eat there freely. And the basic premise is that Mitzrayim, which is of course hostile and antithetical to Kedusha, to holiness, yes, the forces of evil they are parasites. They like to have a free ride, freeloaders. They like to enjoy things for free, without effort, without toil. But anything that has value, anything that has meaning, has to come often through effort, through hard work. And if we want to accomplish a mitzvah, thus we should not try to take away from the hardship and the toil. Of course, we don't need to pursue and to make things more difficult and look for the hardest way to fulfill the mitzvah. However, if the way the mitzvah is, it is not easy to accomplish, that is the natural way to do it, we should not seek to remove or minimize the hardship, because that is part of what the mitzvah is. And if we want to indeed transform and make and create a realm of holiness in that space, we need to embrace the hardship and the difficulty. The Rebbe brings the story of the Arizal, who, when it would come to performing a mitzvah, and he need to pay, he need to pay for something associated with the mitzvah, he would never bargain. He would pay, he would go to the merchant and ask, how much is this? And the person would give him a price, and he would pay the full amount without any haggling, without any negotiation. Which this is actually a new level above what the Zohar says. The Zohar was telling us that mitzvahs, you need to work, you need to take toil and effort, but sometimes through natural means we could reduce the hardship. Just like the Arizal, he wasn't going to come and use spiritual magical powers to acquire something. Negotiation is a natural process. So if someone says, yes, you want to buy this matzah, it's $100, you can come and say, well, I'll pay 75. That is not circumventing through supernatural means, paying for the matzah. You're just trying to reduce the hardship or the price that one has to pay. Nevertheless, the Arizal did not negotiate. He met the full demanded price. Further, the Rebbe says everything we study about in the Kabbalistic and mystical realms is reflected in the exoteric, the revealed part of the Torah. The Talmud in Sukkah tells us about Rabban Gamliel, that one year, the price of the esrog was extremely exorbitant. He paid 1,000 zuz for a single esrog. 1,000 zuz, it's perhaps today what we would say he spent $1 million on the esrog. And this displayed his great affection and love for performing mitzvahs. Which this, in a way, the story is even more novel than the Arizal, because the Arizal, he didn't haggle on the price of a mitzvah. He didn't negotiate. He paid the full amount. There, whatever the mitzvah was, that's what he paid for. But here, when it came to Rabban Gamliel, the reason why esrog could never be 1,000 zuz, to pay $1 million for an esrog, it must have been some other reason. Perhaps it's not clear from the Gemara why it was that expensive. Maybe it was a famine. There was some ice storm in Italy, and therefore the esrogim was it was like a rare commodity, and therefore we had to pay a lot. So we see from here that if the difficulty may not stem from the mitzvah itself, it may be from other side reasons, side issues that exacerbate the difficulty of the mitzvah, we still have to meet the challenge head on. And indeed, just like when it came to Avram, when he performed the mitzvah of Milah, so there is the difficulty of the mitzvah itself to perform the Milah. But Avram had other conditions, as today a big word is, he had other comorbidities. He was older, and for him to perform the mitzvah was unusually difficult. And yet, he did not shy away. He did not back down. And further, the Rebbe says, he brings a second story of the Arizal, that there were times that the Arizal would take his purse of money and he would walk up to the merchant and he would present his wallet and says, take whatever you think is appropriate for this. Whatever you want, I'm buying a mezuzah, here, take whatever you think is appropriate. Which here, there's not even a side difficulty. Somehow you place your everything that you have in the merchant's hands, and the merchant can decide however much they want to charge, which that is even a whole new level. But we have from all of this is that we see from these stories how when it came to a mitzvah, they realized that sometimes that is what's demanded from them at that time. And therefore, they did not look to see how they could minimize or circumvent the hardship or the price they had to pay. Rather, they paid the full amount. So what does this have to do with Avram and feeling pain and the whole discussion here? As we mentioned, the purpose of the bris was to create a covenant and a relationship with Hashem that wasn't just a theoretical abstract thing, rather something that actually was imprinted on the physical body. When a person performs a bris, naturally, a person experiences pain. It's a physical phenomenon. Now, there is a discussion in halacha. Are people allowed to, when performing the bris, use anesthetics to be able to minimize the pain of the bris? But based on what we're saying here, what are we saying? If the whole purpose of the mitzvah is to transform the physical body to make it holy, the whole point of the bris is that the physical flesh should be imbued and should experience the spiritual. So the bris has to be in the physical body with all of its properties through the natural means. What is the natural need? That the flesh should feel pain. If a person were to dull or blunt the impacts of the bris, that means there would be some property, there'd be some aspect or facet of the body that has not fully experienced the bris. That would be, so to speak, outside of the covenant. And therefore, when one does the bris, we should not try to dull the pain. We should fully embrace it, because that means that that encompasses every aspect of the body to be entered into the covenant, into the bris. And therefore, Avram, if he wouldn't experience the bris, that would the pain of the bris, that would mean that there was a part of him that wasn't fully, totally engaged. And this explains why Reb Kana told Reb Levi, are you telling me Avram didn't experience pain? You're a liar and a cheater. Such a sharp and unusual comment. But in light of what we're saying is, if we are to explain or to assert that Avram did not feel pain, that would minimize the meaning and the significance of this experience. The bris wasn't a truly all-encompassing, inclusive experience where the person, their entirety, enters into the bris with Hashem. If this is the case, now we understand why Avram had to wait for 3 days for Hashem, rather why Hashem waited for 3 days to visit Avram. We know that when a person visits someone, the Talmud says that we alleviate and remove 1/60th of the person's illness. This is when a regular person visits. However, when Hashem visits, all bets are off. The Ramban says, when Hashem visited Avram, Vayeira of Hashem, it was this miraculous experience where he was totally healed. Now imagine if Hashem, now on the third day, after three days, a person is naturally healed from the intense effects of the pain of the bris. If Hashem would have come on the first or second day, when Avram naturally should be feeling the excruciating pain, Hashem would come and visit, he would be instantly healed. But then Avram would be losing out on fully experiencing not just the immediate experience of the bris, but its aftermath. And Avram wanted, or rather needed to, fully experience the bris. So therefore, Hashem did not visit him until the third day. And therefore, as we question why Avram himself, did he feel any pain? True, he did have this great excitement and great passion and enthusiasm that he was finally experiencing the bris, but at the end of the day, he forced himself, so to speak, to feel the pain, because he realized this was a fundamental and critical component of the mitzvah itself. In the Hasidic, Kabbalistic works, it explains this concept of being ill on a more sublime and spiritual level, where the concept of sickness in Hebrew we know is chole, person who is ill. Chole has the numerical value of 49. It's explained in the Kabbalistic works that there are 50 gates, nun shari bina, of understanding and perception. And Avram, through his divine worship and service, he was able to achieve 49 levels. The 50th is something that is not something we can achieve on our own. It's something that is transcendental. Much like the Sfira to Omer, we go through the 49 days of counting of self-refinement and perfection, but the 50th day Shavuot, we don't count. We only count 49 days. The 50th comes on its own. So Avram, when he reaches the 49th level of spiritual refinement, he becomes chola. He becomes spiritually sick because of right now, beforehand, when you're far away, you don't feel what you're missing. You're so far removed, you don't realize the intense spiritual reality that you are missing. But it's when he reaches the Memtes, the 49th level, he becomes chole, he becomes spiritually ill. But it is through this process, through the milah, that Avram experiences that, and Hashem gifts him that 50th level of understanding. Much like we know by Moshe Rabbeinu as well. When he passed away, he was buried at Har Nevo. Nevo, the Kabbalah says, is an amalgam of Nun Bo. Moshe Rabbeinu, on the very culmination of his life, he achieved the Nun. In him, there was that 50th level understanding, which is not something that a human can achieve through their own initiative, through their own work. It's something that must be gifted from above. So what is the takeaway from this? Number one, of course, there's a mitzvah to visit the ill. We learn from here, Hashem himself pays a direct call to Avram, and through this, he alleviates his pain and his suffering. But also we see that sometimes this concept of doing the mitzvah through natural means, but in our case, what it means is about sometimes the difficulty and the hardship associated with mitzvahs. It may be in our families raising children, in our marriages, and in other areas in life. And there are some things that we find particularly daunting, challenging, and very, very difficult to do. But we see from here that it is the challenge, it is that hardship we should not shy away from. Indeed, we should embrace, because sometimes that is what the mitzvah is all about. And it is through embracing that difficulty, it has a profound meaning, not just for us, but also for our children. You know, many years ago, there was this father who, by trade, he was living up in Tzfas in Israel, and he would make ovens. That was his profession, and he would do quite well. He would build these ovens, furnaces, and they would use that in the winter to warm themselves. They would warm themselves up, and that was his profession. And since he was doing reasonably well, he hired a private tutor to teach his son Torah, private malamed. And like this, they would pay every single month, and all was well. It was one winter, it was a particularly cold winter, and people, for whatever reason, there was no bricks available, or perhaps people weren't working as much, and there was no demand for the ovens, and he had no work. He had no income. Month and month goes by, and he is not able to pay this malamed. Finally, it's the month of Tevis. It's 3 months into the winter, and the teacher says to his Talmud, to his student, says, "This is the last day that we're going to learn. Tomorrow, please don't come back. I also have a family to support. I have children. I need to find another job. This can't continue." The boy comes home to his father and he tells him, "Today was the last day of Cheder, and the Malamed said he's not going to be teaching me anymore. There's no money, and he also has a family to support." The father hears this. He is filled with anguish, and he couldn't even bring himself to say a word. leaves the house and he goes to the Beis Medrash to say some Tehillim. While he's sitting there, he hears there are two wealthy people talking between each other. They just made a shidduch between their children, and they're discussing, they're negotiating. But then they say, you know what? I don't see how we could continue with this shidduch. Right now, we want to give them a little apartment, little home to live in, but there are no ovens, there's no bricks available. And how could we put our children in this freezing cold winter that we're in right now, and there's not a fireplace to warm them? When the father hears this, he goes over to them and says, tell me, if I build you an oven, will you give me 6 gold coins for it? And when they hear it, they says, 6 gold coins, no problem. I don't know how you can be able to supply it. There's no bricks, there's no ovens. I don't know how you can do it, but if you're able to present us with an oven, we will pay that full amount. Without saying a word, he goes back home and he takes out a hammer and a knife and chisels and begins to dismantle the oven that's in his house, brick by brick, make sure they don't get ruined. And he takes out every single brick. And then he goes and reassembles all of these bricks to make a new oven. And then he goes to the rich people and the 2 parents, and he says, look, here is your oven. And they go and they give him the 6 gold coins. The father takes the money, goes back home to his son, and says, here's the 6 gold coins. Tell your Rebbe, 3 are for the 3 past months that are past due that we owe him, and another 3 for the next 3 months. Take the money and go back to learn. And this boy says, that winter, our bones were freezing cold. It was an unusually harsh and cold winter. We were freezing cold. But in our hearts, there burned this passionate flame and love for Torah. And he says, till today, anything that I have amounted to become a Talmid Chacham and a scholar, and indeed he was, he says, all of that was because of the Mesiras Nefesh, the devotion and the sacrifice that my father had for my Torah study. So each and every one of us, we oftentimes encounter challenges and difficulties in every aspect of our lives. And we ask Hashem, why does it have to be difficult? Why can't things just be easy? But sometimes we have to know that Hashem doesn't just want the mitzvahs to be done in a very easy and chilled manner. He wants us to embrace the natural way. And sometimes we're doing something and we go up against a brick wall. And no matter where we turn, it seems like the odds are stacked against us and everything is against us. But ultimately, when we have determination and we persevere, we're able to bring out how all of those challenges and all those difficulties are really part of the process of performing the mitzvah. And we get all of this koach, we get the drive and the motivation and the inspiration from Avraham Avinu many years ago when he performed the mitzvah. And he embraced every aspect of the pain and the excruciating difficulty, which he celebrated with joy. So may Hashem, of course, not give us any difficulty, no challenges, but indeed, may Hashem alleviate all the hardship, the greatest hardship, the hardship of the Gullus. May we merit the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, in Vayeira. Amen.